Hi, I am Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast from Kates-Boylston. Conversations worth having about the business and culture surrounding death care and end-of-life matters. This week, we're speaking with my colleague, Tom Nondorf. He joins us quarterly to bring us up to date on what's going on in American cemetery and cremation. While we focus on the June 2025 issue, there's always cool stuff to read in that magazine, and you can check it out online. Before we get to the conversation, I want to remind you to check out events.katesboylston.com, where we have all of our webinars and virtual and in-person events listed so you can see what's coming up. The next one we have is How to DIY Your Marketing. It's from the folks at Need. We actually just finished up a really cool webinar that Tom and I talk about in this episode that had to do with recycling and marketing for crematories. But this next one that's coming up is going to be for everybody. We also get into the changing of the guards at Greenwood Cemetery, as well as a ton of other stuff. It's a great episode. Tom is entertaining as always. But before we get to that, let's listen to this message from our friends and sponsors at Matthews International. For more than 20 years, Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions has been providing innovative technology to support funeral professionals and their families. Their Arranger presentation system makes showcasing service and merchandise options simple. Family Connections technology enables families to participate in arrangement planning from the comfort of home. And the Advisor system combines case management and interactive planning, all in one place. Simplify the arrangement process with technology designed for you. Visit MatthewsAurora.com for a free demo or call 1-800-457-111 today. That's MatthewsAurora.com or 1-800-457-1111. Call today. So welcome back for our quarterly visit. You get to come on. I get to have you on, I guess, every quarter or so to talk about some of the things that are going on in SEM. And this is a great time because you've got some cool stuff coming out as this comes out. So this will be out at the very end of May. And we're going to talk about the June issue. And I would like to start, if you don't mind, with all the fun things that are going on at Greenwood Cemetery.
Greenwood Cemetery. Hey, man, thanks for having me on board, by the way. Let me just get that out of the way.
As always.
That's the thing today. We don't say I have to do something anyway, so we get to do that. We get to do this. I get to cover cemeteries. And let me just preface talking about Greenwood by saying it's an amazing thing that I ended up covering and writing about cemeteries for a living because, I grew up with a cemetery at the end of my street and, had to pass it every day on the way to school. Obviously, I wrote a story last year, if you recall, about
Finding
the leg in the cemetery. So
everybody remembers that story.
And that was your typical story, a cemetery that had fallen into disrepair, and you just thought that's the way they were, And now I want to say that cemeteries have challenges, but there's a golden age now of cemeteries trying a little harder, trying to engage with their communities, because fast forward to my life living in Brooklyn, and I lived on 7th Avenue, and Greenwood Cemetery was a few blocks away. I didn't even know it till there was a television program on PBS with David Hartman, who's still alive, if you remember the great David Hartman.
I do. He used to be like Good Morning America or one of those, right?
Yeah, the great David Hartman and a guy named Barry Lewis, and it was a series, called like David and Barry do Queens or whatever. Yeah. And they would go on a very minute level. So they might be on your street showing you stuff you didn't know about, which basically happens. They're in Greenwood Cemetery. And they're like, and that was the first time I learned of the concept that cemeteries once upon a time were places for picnics, were tourist attractions. And Greenwood famously was, second, they said, to Niagara Falls as a tourist attraction on the East Coast. And that was fascinating. Then I'm like, I got to go over there and check it out. I never would have thought to do that. And that's what I'm getting back to, is that we had this world existed. I don't know how it was for you in cemeteries, but you didn't always know, am I allowed to walk around in here? And, because that cemetery of my childhood, you weren't really supposed to go through. Greenwood didn't look exactly like you were supposed to go through. But now after listening to David Hartman, I was like, oh, you can go in there. Then I walked in there and it was like a world opened up before my eyes. You could walk into the middle and be in this pond and area and not know you were still in New York City. I mean, didn't hear the sounds of New York City. It's incredible. And the amount of history that's at Greenwood Cemetery. So it was great. I got a chance to write a love letter of sorts. Richard J. Moylan had been there working in the cemetery for about 50 years. Started as a kid, basically. Has photos of himself as a toddler in Greenwood Cemetery.
Wow.
And he ended up becoming the president of it. And he just retired this year, approaching, he was about 40 years, coming up on 40 years as the president of the cemetery. So everything that's great about it now is largely due to him. So it was a great thing that I got to speak with him. It's a long way of saying I felt very blessed. I'm very happy with our June issue because I was able to speak with Richard Moylan, who I would never have known by name until I took this job. But, was a hero that I didn't know by name because he made it amazing. And he said this, and he's not the first cemetery operations person to say to me, we weren't friendly for a lot of years. There were years where we chased people away who came to try and hang out. If you didn't say, I'm going to see this particular person and have proof of it, they didn't want you there. And now fast forward again to today, what are we talking about all the time with cemeteries? How to get people in the gates, how to get people to see what they have to offer. So it's an amazing thing that it's come full circle like that. Richard J. Moylan was a huge part of that. And to where, eventually when I no longer lived in Brooklyn, I could go there knowing there would be some concerts, some events going on, artistic things happening there, tours. We've written about so much. And I always tell a story when I started here that I thought, I'd probably put it on my cover letter when I was applying for Kates-Boylston. I lived near Greenwood Cemetery, And then I got hired, and like our first 3 issues were all these Greenwood Cemetery stories written by other people. I'm like, everybody's got a story to tell. So we had to almost be like, let's not have Greenwood sets this for a couple months here. Because I'm sorry, I was just to finish, because there are so many amazing stories there and history there.
I wanted to kind of mention that a little bit for the reason that, Greenwood is a very big cemetery and they have the resources, but they also make a lot of noise. And, we're reaching a point in history where you can make a lot of noise without having a lot of resources. And that is kind of the disconnect. Like if you have a cool historian, or if you are the cool historian, or if you know a ton about your cemetery's history, literally just putting it online and sharing it is a way to amplify it. And what makes Greenwood is Greenwood for thousands of reasons. But one of the things that makes it attractive to writers is it's easy to write about. There's a ton of information. And if you call, they're going to answer the phone and they're going to tell you a cool story that you haven't heard before because they have a million of them. And I don't think that's unique to Greenwood. I think that most cemeteries that have had anybody there for any period of time will have stories that they can tell. And you mentioned a couple of issues ago, like you don't have to have General Grant's horse or something buried in your cemetery to be able to kind of tell stories about it.
It's true. Not everyone is going to have, the actor who played the Wizard of Oz and Basquiat and all these famous historical figures and monuments to tragedies that are prima facie interesting things. A lot of cemeteries that are in really great shape, you're lucky if you have one guy who might have played minor league baseball in the 50s is their calling card. But it's like, what can you do though to make yourself attractive, to make yourself open? And also you can dig into your locality. You know, a lot of places are having success now with the tours where, you know, it's not anybody world famous, but it's like, hey, here's a crazy story about this crazy mayor we had in, you know, in the 1920s. And you have somebody dressed up as him.
Right.
And he's out there and talking as if he is him and leading people that way. I mean, it's about creativity. But what Richard Moylan said, and I was blessed to have a good long conversation with him, the results of which are the focus of our June edition. The thing he did that people thought was crazy was hire a PR company. And people were like, what are you doing? You know, but then they started putting themselves out to where, you know, local New York papers were fighting over stories about Greenwood. Because like you said, there is so much. So on a smaller scale, not everybody's going to have those stories, like we said, but, you know, it's got to be something interesting about your cemetery if you're wanting to stay in the public eye.
And if there is, you should call my friend Tom and tell him about it because he'll do a story.
That's very true, Tony. No, we love it. You know, I know people are busy out there. You know, we deal with this when we try to get in touch with funeral directors. We try and get in touch with cemetery folks. These people, it's not like they're living to be in our magazine.
Right, yeah.
If they get our magazine, that's great. But man, if you do have stories to tell and you get a few minutes, let's run with it because, you know, I would wager that no matter who's at your cemetery, there's stories. I mean, look, every life is a story. It's just uncovering those, you know.
Yeah.
I was just talking with Mandy Ben Walid, who works for Keeper, and they do digital memorialization, you know. And it's like, we tend to think now in terms of current day, people that die, how can we memorialize them? I think about my brother I lost when I was a kid, pre-internet era, pre-time when you would have any kind of anything other than a newspaper article and the people in your town to know about it. But this is a great story that I've often thought, how could I reach back and get his story to where people could see it, to where people who knew him in junior high could say, oh yeah, I remember Bob, you know, he's a great kid, you know, that kind of thing. You know, everybody's got a story. I think it's incumbent upon people who work at and who love cemeteries to tell those stories. There's a lot of people out there doing it. But if you run a cemetery, you want to concentrate, obviously, on your grounds and sales, but storytelling has got to be a big part of it.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines, I want to mention something that I wrote already this month. So it's already out and about. It was on a recent podcast. People might have heard it. But during the SCI earnings call, one of the things that they talked about was reimagining their cemeteries that they already have to find more space, like going up and not being afraid to move roads if they need to move roads, like trying to find space and also trying to be encouraging. And this idea of having stories to tell is part of that, you know, just reaching out and saying, like, because you have the feature, you know, projects we're proud of. I'm sorry if I got that wrong.
That's projects you're proud of.
Projects you're proud of. And those are stories about what your cemetery is doing to improve itself. And, you know, everyone who's done a project recently, you know, could reach out and tell you that story.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I don't know if you were remembering this article coming up in June also of a place, and this is an SCI property called Wind and Sea. Well, the place is called El Camino, and that's in San Diego. El Camino Memorial, Sorrento Valley, and Memorial Park. Beautiful place as is, but they're facing that issue. How do we get more inventory? And instead of just, you know, throwing a couple more columbaria on the scene, what do we do something creative? They went to the top of an existing building and constructed this whole area and brought in the views, not the views really, but the vibes of the nearby ocean, so that the sidewalks are painted to look like little waves are coming over them. And that's a really interesting story to talk about in terms of, you know, how the salespeople benefit from that at these places. Because there's really a sales type guy who approached and said, the guy who handles the properties for SCI in that territory, and said, come up with something fresh, And, they went back and forth a couple times and finally said, what about, he basically knew a beach that his daughter takes swimming or surfing lessons at, called Wind and Sea out. So it would, for the locals, it called to mind something for them. But for people coming to the place, there's this very unique thing. And the mini columbaria are like waves, and it's a very cool thing. And, it's that type of thinking too that is the way forward. And I'll say something else, which is, we talk about cremation and how much we talk about cremation in the magazine, which we try to do more. But as cremation rises, I remind people that every cremation story is also a cemetery story. I mean, the idea is that people want to be memorialized, even if cremated, but be in a place that's very special and end up somewhere that's very special. So they don't end up, in a mantle. Then the mantle, a couple years on, becomes a closet. Then the closet becomes, I don't know what, a garage sale. Somebody not knowing what it even is, who it even was, that kind of thing. Permanent memorialization is a cemetery thing. It's what they do.
Absolutely. And this, when you were talking about the salespeople, the first thing that came to my mind is you have to let people envision themselves there. Like, you're coming here, we all have a final destination. And this is why we think this would be a good one for you. Just like when you're speaking with a real estate agent about buying a house. And, they're like, well, imagine what you could do. Imagine your grandkids wanting to come here because it's a nice place to come and also because grandpa's there,
It's funny to talk about aspirational type sales when you're talking about cemeteries because, I don't know about you, Tony, you're not aspiring to be buried yet, right?
No, I'm not. I mean, I'm facing it, but not well.
But it's for that same reason where people, you talk about houses, houses that are left empty they're not furnished when somebody's selling, do worse than houses that are furnished. And it's that aspirational thing. Oh, well, that couch looks good there. Hell, I'd love that furniture. I'd love to be, mid-century modern like these people. You start imagining that. Whereas if the place is just empty, you don't have anything to hook your mind on to. So I think cemeteries that are doing things like this, like Wind and Sea, a few other places we've talked to where they're saying, all right, how can we get creative to where we're eye-catching, to where people want to or can be easily coaxed into taking a tour and saying, oh, yeah, this would not be a bad place to end up or for my family to end up.
The other thing, as long as we're on the cremation train, I want to call this, I don't know, a coming out issue. I can't think of the right word to kind of express how we're doing some real cremation journalism, if there's such a thing, we both got to talk to a bunch of recyclers this month for this issue. I did a webinar and you have a couple stories, and it's the first time since I've been here, that we've really dug into recycling. Like, I have a better sense now of how it can work than I've ever had before. And I've done stories on recycling, but you got some rock stars in the magazine.
Well, it's tricky. The first time I went to like ICCFA convention and then maybe Cana convention, I was flabbergasted at the number of recycling businesses that were there, beating the drum for people. And I was like, is there really this much out there? It was kind of a crazy thing. But there was a little bit of tight-lippedness in terms of, what exactly is the return on investment? How does it work exactly? Not, we wanted to do this as a way to attract, and for the magazine to attract advertisers, of course, but to also demystify the business a little bit. And you talked with Kevin McKay, who I also talked to for the magazine. You did a webinar recently with him, right?
Yeah, we did a webinar, and him and Brent Thorson, And I want to talk about something that Brent said because I've put it in my column and I'm going to be harping on it for the rest of my life. So the rest of my life starts now, right? Um, he talked about not having urns for sale on your website. And he said something so insightful that it's so obvious. It's one of those things that you're like, yes, of course, but I've never heard it before. He said, if people go to your website and they can't buy an urn, they're going to go someplace else and buy an urn. People don't know. I don't know this very second what an urn costs, right? If I needed to buy an urn tomorrow, no clue what it would. I'm sorry, that's not true. I have an idea, but I don't know what it costs at the funeral home across the street from me. I do know what it costs on Amazon, right? And he works for Terry Bear, which makes urns, but his presentation wasn't at all about urns. It was about distinguishing yourself as a cremation destination for your neighborhood. So we talked about Google ranking and things like that, and sponsoring baseball teams, the things that as people who cover this, we're used to hearing as far as getting the word out. But this idea that if someone goes to your website and can't click on a cremation page, and when they get to the cremation page, they can't click on an urn sales page, that could be the difference between a direct cremation through a more anonymous company and establishing a relationship with your local funeral home. And I thought that was huge. And I just wanted to mention that before we get into the metal recycling, because it's something that if you're interested in cremation, if you work in cremation, it's something really to consider, that making those urns available online could be the difference between whether or not you get the direct cremation. And it just had never occurred to me to put it that way. But after the direct cremation, you've got all of this metal left over, and that's what we talked to Kevin about.
Well, just touching on that for a sec, it seems obvious once you say it, right? Of course.
Yeah.
What do you do when you want something? If there's, I collect records, okay? If there's a record I can't find, at a store, and I'm like, oh, all right, I'm just going to buy it online. I'm going to look and go to the easiest route. You got to make people's routes easy on the internet, where they don't have to open 10 windows or go, if you don't even have a link, you don't even have a way for people to consider urns on your website, you're not encouraging anything.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Speaking with Kevin, then, it was a great way to learn because he's very open. I also talked with a new company. I don't want to say new company. They've been kicking butt in Europe. Ortho Metals. Hidde Verbaern is the son of the founder, and they're kind of in a position where they have succeeded in Europe. They feel that they were ahead of the game and anybody doing metal recycling, and now they want to come and show America how they're doing it. So between him and Kevin, what I loved about both those companies and those individuals in talking about recycling, they're very open, and that's part of their
that's the pitch
too.
Yeah, we'll tell you to the ounce what we recycled and how much you're getting.
What do you want to know? Yeah. If you go, by the way, do you want to come and see us do it? You want to come take a tour? We're open. That's exciting. If you're able to shop around and somebody's offering you that chance, whether you take them up on it or not, that they're saying basically, come see what we do. The curtain is open. I think I said this in the article about Kevin McKay at Cremation Recycling. Let's get his business name out there. He wants you to look for the wizard behind the curtain, and they're not hiding it, because, and this is just to your Ortho Metals and a couple of these guys like Kevin talking about, some of these places aren't so clear about it, about where your money, how much money should be coming back to you, what's in the metal.
If I may, the one in the webinar, not only did he show a bunch of videos, but he pulled a report from a competitor company, and he closed out their names. I don't know what company it was, but he showed their report, and then he showed what was missing in their report. Like, they showed how much you were getting. They didn't show how much they took.
Yeah,
go ahead.
He loves to do that because I think that's a very strong sales point too,
It is.
because look, we all have things we know about and we don't. And he said a few years ago, coming to a crematory and saying, "Hey, we'll give you money for this metal." People were like, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to throw this out. You're going to give me money for it." They were happy with anything. He was like, you like
Yeah.
somebody showing up and you had a pile of old newspapers, and they said they were going to give you money for it. That's found gold. We'll take it. We'll take it.
Yeah,
Anything's
literally.
better than nothing. But now, as time has gone on, the level of detail at which they're really able to analyze these metals.
Not only is the competition greater, but the rewards are greater, and the metal is getting rarer. You know?
It's true. And what I was going to say is that, there are all those things in which we're not experts in. And crematory owners are doing a lot of stuff. They're not analyzing the metal that's coming out of people. It's like when you go to a mechanic, you're a little bit at your mechanic's mercy unless you know everything there is to know about a car. You don't know what it's going to cost. Like you talked about, if you were going to buy an urn out of nowhere, if somebody said it cost $900, you'd be like, oh, I guess that's what urns cost. Okay.
Yeah, right.
And, sometimes you take your car to the mechanic and it's like, okay, I guess so. $2,000 for that? I don't, you don't even have a place to argue. I think with what these guys are doing, some of these companies, it's really smart. They're giving people a place of knowledge from which to really be able to argue and say, well, I should be getting more. And then they're saying, we're going to give you more.
And that's precisely the thing. There is a little bit, I don't even want to call it more work, but I will, because that's how I started the sentence, right? There is a little bit more work on your part. You have to check but I mean, you also have to work and check to make sure you got the right change back when you go to the grocery store, if you still use cash at the grocery store. That wasn't a great analogy, was it?
There are some of us still out there. But yeah, there's there's a million ways in which you're not expert or don't have the time to audit something that maybe you should be taking a closer look at. Especially when you're running a business, you're getting money for something, so why dig that deeply into it? But talking to Hida at Ortho Metals, talking to Kevin McKay, it was kind of like, it behooves you to at least take a look at your recycler if you're in a recycler operation. And it seems like today, the battle is no longer finding people who aren't doing recycling, but it's about finding people who want to maybe find a more efficient way or a more open way. And that's what these guys are doing.
And I have to say, the numbers that they were providing were shocking. Like, I didn't know how much, and of course, gold is going through the roof now, so that doesn't hurt. But this is real money that was being left on the table. This isn't just, this isn't just lunch out at like, if this isn't my royalty check, when I get my royalty check and I'm like, ooh, we're going for Chinese food tonight, it's real money that you get back from these.
Yeah. It's the same reason that you have to put a fence at the bottom of your car now if you have a catalytic converter. I mean, you wouldn't think that it's worth anybody's while to get under your car and steal that metal, but people know now the value. It's not a world now where people are unwise to the value of stuff. So, I think people in cremation can stand to get a little wiser.
Yes, absolutely. And we are kind of coming up against it. So before I let you go, I want to ask you, is there something else you wanted to say and didn't get a chance to say, or something I should have asked and didn't?
Oh, man. There's a million things you should have asked. You didn't even ask me how my mother's doing, anything. She's great, by the way.
Excellent.
No, I think we covered the main things I wanted to talk about. For Greenwood, I'll just leave with another little funny, to me, Greenwood story, which is in one of my early visits to Greenwood. I come upon this headstone, and it's filled with, it's got a guy's bust, and it's got all these paragraphs of quotes from him.
Wow.
And it literally, one of the quotes is like, sorry that, none of my wisdom will be recognized in my time. And I'm like, wow, who was this guy? Jeez. And I remembered his name, Henry George, and I looked him up, and it turned out he was an economist, and he's still pretty well known among economists, but his whole thing was a single tax theory where you paid a tax only on land. And this was a big deal, and some people went for it to the degree that supposedly when he had his funeral procession, it started at like Grand Central Station in Manhattan and was lined with people all the way to Brooklyn for his funeral. So I learned about, I'm like, this is crazy. It tells you, how, when we talk about stories at the cemetery, here's a guy basically forgotten let's say to the common person doesn't know who Henry George does. I think people who study economics do, and some historians, but I didn't. And I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. Shortly, a few years later, I moved to Delaware, which is your neighbor. You're not far from Delaware, but I'm up in the very top of Delaware. And I'm driving up near where I live. There were these 3 towns, like Arden Croft, Ardendale, I want to say is the third one, and really old-fashioned looking and weird little street signs. And then I see a plaque, and it's like, hey, these are the Ardens, founded on the principles of Henry George. I'm like, I never would have, had I not seen that monument, I never would have made any connection there. But it was like, okay, these are 3 little communities that were founded, and nobody owns the land that the houses are on. People only own their houses, and it was almost, dare I say, communal enterprise of these 3 communities based on the life of Henry George and the teachings of Henry George. So I found that very fascinating, because these are the kind of stories you see, and they might just crop up. The stories you find in a cemetery crop up in other part of your life. That, to me, just touches again on the magic for me that is Greenwood Cemetery. So I do hope folks enjoy learning and reading about Richard J. Moylan, who's the guy who really opened up and had a lot of great ideas for what it can be. And they've got new stuff. And they have now, they just announced, I think I just got yesterday, their new president.
Oh, that's right.
Meera Joshi is her name. She had worked with the mayor's office and has some connections to Greenwood. So I'll follow up and get more information about her. But there is somebody new in charge there now. So that's very exciting.
Very cool. All right. Well, that will do us for this time. We'll put a link in the show notes to your email. If anybody has any stories they want to share, they can click on that and send it your way. And I look forward to talking to you again in another couple of weeks.
Thank you, Tony.
For more than 20 years, Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions has been providing innovative technology to support funeral professionals and their families. Their Arranger presentation system makes showcasing service and merchandise options simple. Family Connections technology enables families to participate in arrangement planning from the comfort of home. And the Advisor system combines case management and interactive planning, all in one place. Simplify the arrangement process with technology designed for you. Visit MatthewsAurora.com for a free demo or call 1-800-457-111 today. That's MatthewsAurora.com or 1-800-457-1111. Call today. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. If you're on Apple, follow along. If you are listening or watching on YouTube, just ring that subscribe bell and you'll know when our shows are out. We've picked up a bunch of new listeners over the last couple of weeks, and I'm really always flattered that we have more people coming on and more people listening, and you guys seem to get a real kick out of the In Case You Missed It episodes, so I'm happy to continue to do those. Once again, please let me remind you to check out events.Kates-Boylston.com, where we have all of our upcoming webinars and virtual events and our in-person events, and they're always worth attending. Everyone gets a kick out of them. Finally, if you are not a subscriber to Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter, I'd love it if you took a look at it. I work real hard on it. I think it's worth the price of admission every week, and you get free access to a couple of stories every month for just the cost of your email. So please check that out as well. And that will do it for this time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.